Okay, hi everyone. Hopefully this is working. Cool, right, I'm going to jump in. So it's just me talking, I believe. I'm not sure if questions can go in the comments bar, but I'll try and do all questions at the end if that's all right, because I think it's not possible to share audio with everyone. So this is the 8th masterclass for Crack, and I believe an invite's been sent out to other people just to get an experience for the school. So just very briefly, I'll just introduce myself if you don't know me. I'm Mike Nicholson. Previously, I was a creative at Abbott Mead Vickers for 14 years, and then a CD, ECD at TBWA London, before freelancing at a few agencies, Wieden Kennedy in London and Amsterdam, the Viral Factory, Adam and Eve, before working for Toaster, which is a digital agency primarily doing Google business, where I ended up ECDing there. And then I started the AM Partnership in Canada and came back to England and ECD'd at Brave. The last 3 years I've been doing a mixture of consulting and freelance work, as well as being part of the faculty at the school. So this is my third intake, and these two photos are the previous intakes. So I think I've done over about 100 students so far, which has been awesome fun, way more fun than real work. Before I go into the talk, I was just going to, I always do a few sort of bonus slides just to share kind of what I've been coming across in between the last talk I've done. And I was thinking about this the other day, kind of like, how can you get your foot in the door in the current climate? So I was thinking maybe you could apply to become the agency COVID door person, kind of like one of those fancy door people that opens doors at Fortnum & Mason and posh hotels. Maybe you could go and open the door at the agency to avoid people touching the door handle. Could do a cool outfit, something like that. Maybe that would get you in. An always learning bonus. Not sure if you're familiar with YCN. It stands for You Can Now, but they basically started out sharing loads of knowledge and stuff, kind of like It's Nice That. And they do a great educational section as well. So it's really good to check out that website and see, continue learning, especially when you leave school. It's a great resource. And then lastly, I came across this the other day, came from D&AD, addjobwall.com, and I believe they're set up partly by the Young Creative Council, but they post junior-only jobs, so it's kind of like a really good place to find work if you're struggling to get hold of work. So that's good to know as well. So my talk today is basically trying to build on what I taught you last time, which was how to sort of turn placement into permanent. This is going to be a sort of top line journey from junior to founder in 60 minutes. And what I've tried to do is collate all sort of tips and learnings that I've come across, as well as wisdom from people I've been lucky enough to work with, in a sequence that hopefully will get you thinking and start getting a strategy together for your career moving forwards. I think that why this matters now, you might be thinking, well, I haven't even started yet. But one of the other mentors, Richard Russell, mentioned he kind of regretted, and I have a sort of similar sort of feeling to what he said, that he didn't start his own company, and he thought you could do it. I think he said 7 years to founder, from start to starting your own company. Maybe you need a bit longer, might be 10, but in effect, if you can think now about starting within the next 7 years. The reason why this is so key is, unless you're working in an agency where you're allowed to be autonomous and trusted to do great work and given great briefs from great clients, inherently you're going to end up having to work on stuff that you don't want to work on, and quite often that can be not as fruitful. Whereas obviously if you're in charge of your own company, you can work on what you choose to work on and you can fire clients, and in effect it's a way of ensuring you're doing the best work, and obviously you're in control and you can sort of dictate kind of stuff, and that always leads to being the most fulfilled creative, because obviously you're doing what you want to do rather than what you're being told to do by someone else. So I'm going to start the journey from junior to senior via mid. I mean, these are all a bit random, but hopefully beneficial. Funnily enough, first thing to think about when you start is your startup. I think, like, it'd be great already to be thinking, what do you want to do when you can do your own company? Assuming you want to do that, and obviously you don't have to. You can stay in a company and end up running that company, or running another company and not have to do your own thing. But I'd really encourage you to try and found your own business if you can. So right at the beginning, it's important to work out what sort of startup you'd like to do, and then where can you start working so that you can end up starting your startup quicker. So obviously, if you want to do an advertising agency, it makes sense to go and learn off the best advertising agencies and people who work in those kinds of businesses. Conversely, if it's a digital company, same sort of thing. So right at the beginning, do all you can to start the best place. And then at that stage, also work out what's your exit strategy, which again sounds like really grown up and serious. But again, if you're going to start something and go all in on starting your own company, it's really important to work out how you want to end it, because not everyone has the same agenda, especially if you're starting a business with different people. So do you want to be Dan Wyden? Do you want to start arguably the best independent network ad agencies and never sell it and just create an amazing company that way? Do you want to be someone like Ridley Scott? Do you want to become a writer and be a creative and then go into directing and end up shooting movies? Or do you want to be someone like David Hyatt, who was a copywriter, Albert Mead and Saatchi's, before setting up Howie's, which was a fashion label, and then he went on to do various other entrepreneurial things like the Do Lectures, and now does Hyatt Denim. So he's like a serial sort of entrepreneur. So right at the beginning, it's really good to have in your head, where do you want to end up, and how do you want to sort of finish your career? If you finish, you might keep working forever. And having that sort of clarity really will help inform every decision you make moving forward. So you can say no to a lot of things if it doesn't align with what you want. And as I've said to you in the past, I think it's really important to try and take control and empower your career as much as possible, rather than relying on everyone else to sort of lead it for you. And the sooner you do that, the more fulfilled you'll be. Really obvious thing to say, but something nearly everyone avoids doing, is to put your work up, especially work in progress. So at the moment, obviously, no one's in an office, so it's difficult to stick stuff up on a wall. But when you are in an office, definitely put stuff up. It can be your first thought, really early on ideas, anything at all. It just gets the conversation going. But more importantly, it will encourage other people in the company to come and talk to you about what you're doing, and they'll react to it. Especially introverts, it's really good for them because they can just sort of see, without having to engage a conversation, what you're doing and give feedback. Now, you can also do that online. Obviously, you could share Google Docs with a group of people, or a whole bunch of people, and see comments. The sooner you do that, the sooner you sort of guarding your ideas and being sort of closed off, the more productive it will be. And people can just see what you're up to, especially when you're not in the office. Quite often people walk into your office and look at stuff and leave comments or be aware of what you're doing. Another really good question to ask people you're working with, which is what we used to do a lot at Abbott Mead Vickers, and it was almost how we were briefed actually, was what's the account person's ad? So quite often the account people and the strategists or planners will be spending a ton of time with the clients. They'll really understand the clients, they'll understand the brief, and they'll be immersed in all the sort of detail and issues. And then when you ask them what's the ad in their heads, the good ones will be able to sort of tell you what they think the answer is, and that gives you a start point to build off, which quite often is really focused and really clear. So what you're doing is you're avoiding all the sort of ambiguity and unknowns, and you're making sure you're starting in the right place rather than just going really random to begin with and doing loads of work that they're never going to buy. So it's a good thing to start asking at the beginning of the process. Nick Worthington, who's now the Clenso BBDO, I think, in New Zealand CCO, always said win for idea and craft. I think I've mentioned this before. Any project you work on, obviously you want to win prizes for the idea, but definitely craft as well, because then you're sort of doubling your chances of getting awards. And the best creatives always are as good as craft as they are as concepts, and you know, it makes sense to push into those spaces. This is a bit of a weird one. I know people have done this. I never did this, but if you get someone to do your PR for you and pay them to do your PR for you, it sounds sort of, you know, for me especially, I kind of find this all a bit dark arts, but it's really effective, obviously, way of making a name for yourself. Also, you'll work with the PR industry, which is a really good thing to understand and get involved with, and you might end up sort of partnering up with someone in PR. So I definitely encourage you, even at the early stage of your career, just to have a few meetings with PR companies and see if they can promote you in different ways. This quote's from Steve Hudson. So Steve and Vic were a team at Abbott Mead Vickers. Steve's now a director, but they're a phenomenal creative team, and they always did amazing TV, especially. And I can remember seeing Steve's scripts at the printer one day, and there was hardly any words on it, and I was really perplexed because Vic was an amazing writer, and I was like, why are there no words on your scripts? And he said, well, they write minimal scripts, so it makes it easy to sell in the idea to the client because they're just judging the concept and not getting distracted by details about a singing parrot or, you know, purple hat or something like that. They're literally just being sold the concept at the initial stage. And then it also allows space within the time frame for everyone else to add to the creative product. So if you're doing, let's say, a 60-second commercial and your script currently is written maybe to 40, so there's detail for 40 seconds of the ad, you're allowing the director to interpret and add touches and detail. But also in casting, an actor might do something that you can add into the script and in the edit and in the sound, and all these other things come together. So every stage of the creative process, you're enabling space for other brilliant people to make the idea and the execution better than it is from what you wrote. So don't overwrite, really keep scripts minimal. This is a quote that Tiago said in your class this year, and I still think it's great. So do work that transcends advertising and becomes culture, which, you know, especially to your generation, is an obvious thing to say, like everything has to stand out these days. But if you can aim to be creating stuff that's as brilliant as culture is, then obviously you'll be rated, and that should be what you try to do. You want to be doing stuff that's competing with other areas of culture, not just the advertising industry. And by doing that, you'll be making more creative work and you'll be crafting more amazing things. And I'm sure you remember all his stories of what he did, mostly with Mark Fairbanks, but those guys did some great work, I think, that every time was not what was expected from the brief. And then Dave said this the other day, which I thought was really good as well. Like, quite often, especially when you're young, the temptation is to sort of be fashionable and cool, and, you know, you're trying to work out what you're about and you're following trends or you're finding your tribes and all that kind of stuff. But actually, especially in advertising, I think if you're honest and just tell people, you know, what product does and why it's good for them, and do it in a good way, not a cool way, that is cool. That's sort of better than being or trying to be cool and follow fashion, because fashion, as we all know, changes a lot. So focus on honesty. There's another, I think it's McCann had a quote: "There's the truth well told, not a lie well sold," was their sort of positioning, which again I think is a brilliant way of thinking about work. Like, what is the truth, and tell it well, and that's kind of what you need to do. Again, right early on, I'd encourage you to invite people out for lunch. Now, that'll cost money, and ideally you want to take them somewhere good, but it's a great investment. I really think, especially the legends of the industry, or any industry you aspire to be in, might be semi-retired, might have more time on their hands, and would love a long lunch. And then obviously you can talk to them about how they got to where they got to, and seek mentorship, but also it's just good fun. I mean, when I started in the industry in '96, people went out for lunch, and it was great. And I was lucky enough to have a lot of lunches with a lot of great people. And then what's happened over time is obviously people don't have lunch, or they might eat a sandwich at the desk now. And I think it's a real shame. So if you can make time and indulge people in a meal, that will be worth so much, I think. And target loads of brilliant people and aim as high as you can, and don't just focus on advertising. Like, invite great people from whatever industry or profession, or talkers, anyone you think's amazing. Just try and book in as many social engagements as you can with these people, because when I reflect back, I realised just how many chats I had with how many people that added to what I was doing, and you only realise in hindsight just how important they were. And now, especially with, you know, if I'm being remote at the moment, it's very hard to physically see people and hook up and do stuff. But I think everyone seems to have more time at the moment, and now we are able to go out again. I'd really encourage you to hook up and meet people. You might find quite, like, once you start and you're a few years in, that you and your partner are getting a bit stale, you're repeating the same conversations. And this is a really hard one, but I think you need to be with the right partner before you start your own company. And it's imperative that you change if you're not, or if you feel like it's not working. Conversely, if you're clicking and you're with a great partner, don't ever split up, because it's so hard to find that partnership that goes the distance. And there are a few examples of the great partnerships that have, such as Tony and Kim at Widens, Richard Foster and John Horton at Mead years ago, and they, again, I mean, I'm not sure about Tony and Kim, but Rich and John must have been 30 or 40 years working together. And obviously, if you're with the same partner and it's working, you can build a body of work together, and you're known for that work, and people want you to do more of that kind of thing. So it's great if you can make it work. But if you can't, make sure you change. And funnily enough, don't just sort of think, I'll go with someone similar. So Rob Oliver was a senior creative at Mead, and Cameron was a youngish writer, and they teamed up. And I think the age gap might have been 20 years, maybe 30. And they immediately started doing great work together. And, you know, nearly always creatives who are good are, you know, even when they're 60, they're as good as any placement team. So don't be put off by age or what they look like, or kind of, you know, their personalities. Just give it a go and see, and you'll be surprised just how cool it can be, I think. I think, I mean, again, we've spoken a bit about this when I've chatted to you guys on your own, but nearly every creative or good creative that I've ever worked with has a really healthy sense of paranoia, and that's normal and that's good. I think don't be stressed or worried that, you know, you've lost it or you haven't got it anymore. That kind of paranoia is very normal for creatives. I think especially art directors, they're always trying to push the craft, and is it good enough? Is it good enough? And they're never happy with what they do. And that's a good mindset to have, and don't overreact to worrying about stuff. Just thrive off that, challenging what you're doing, and nearly always, you need to be your harshest critic. Especially the more successful you get, people will stop giving opinion and telling you what to do. So you have to police that, and it's really important, I think, to maintain that level of scrutiny. As soon as you start, you'll probably be working on other people's campaigns, and that might go for a while. But what you want to do is make your own ones as soon as you can. And obviously that means you're the team that created that piece of work initially, and you'll be known for coming up with something new. So do your best to try and get on to doing your own work as quickly as possible. When you're doing your ads, this is another technique we were taught, which is literally get it all down on a piece of paper and then cover out every element one by one. So every word, every visual, every piece of punctuation, logo, whatever it is. And if the ad works without that element, just take it off the ad, just lose it. It's a really simple sort of editing process. But again, the temptations to do loads of sort of cool design or sort of graphic flourishes and stuff like that, and you're sort of using sexy typefaces and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you've got to nail what is the idea, and art direct and write the idea and make sure that's as clear as possible, and then lose everything else, and then it will communicate better. So that's a really good technique to do. Again, sort of conventional wisdom is you should start working a brief and then give it some time and keep coming back to it and keep going, and don't just sort of crack it straight away. I kind of disagree with this. I think quite often when you've cracked it. Even when you start in the industry, you kind of know when you've got it. And time is really important to make as many ads as you can within the realms of your ability. So as soon as you think you cracked it, I'd just, say I've cracked it and crack on. And a great example of this was Jeremy Carr, who's still working, I believe, at AMV. He was briefed on Guinness Extra Cold by the team, and they got back in the lift and were going down the lift. And by the time they got to their floor, he rang them up and said, I've cracked it. They came back up the lift and he showed them the posters. And that was it. And they went on to do really well. And I always remember that and just thinking that's amazing. It's just like how cool that he had the confidence to just know when it was right, and everyone was just brilliant. Right, let's just get on with it. Another really important thing, especially when you're starting out, is to say no. When we first started, we were the only junior team at Abbott Mead Vickers, and very quickly we had a load of work on because everyone just suddenly realised that we could do all the work that no one else wanted to do particularly. So we ended up within a week with about 10 briefs, and we were drowning immediately, but we didn't want to say no because we were on placement. And luckily Peter Souter got involved and realised what happened and corrected it. But it's imperative you have space to do your work and have time to craft it and learn your craft. And what you can't do when you're busy is that. So you have to say to your boss, I can't do all this, I need, and turn down projects, and make sure you do that often. And then once you're in the industry and hopefully you're kicking in and you're loving it and you're making tons of stuff, you have to make time to see your friends and family and take your holiday. It's imperative that you still have a life outside of work and you recharge and take breaks, especially if you have a family of your own and children, because the industry can suck you in, and if you're successful, you'll love it and you'll keep going on shoots and stuff like that. And before you know it, a whole year's gone by and you haven't had any rest or breaks or anything, which is fine. But over time, what you'll find is all your friends don't know you anymore. You don't know your family as well as you should. And you might end up burning out eventually because you've never recharged properly. And it's not until you take a 2-week holiday at least that you realise just how much you need holiday. And one good tip is, especially when you're starting out and you might not have much money, is you can tag on trips to shoots. And that's not like taking the mickey. That's just like, if you're going to, let's say, South Africa on a shoot and you're going to start production in 2 weeks' time, you can ask the producer, can I go a week early? I'll pay for my own accommodation for that week, because they're flying out anyway. So what you can do is then have a week in South Africa for a lot cheaper than you would have done. And conversely, at the end of a shoot, depending on the post-production, you can do the same sort of thing. It's really important, obviously, to win awards, but it's equally important to win pitches, I think, especially when you're starting. Because at the end of the day, you need to sort of justify your timesheet, and the more expensive you get as a creative, the more you need to justify what you're earning. And if you're not earning the money for the agency, at some point they're going to let you go, which is not obviously what you want. So by winning pitches, not only bringing in new business and money for the company, but also you're improving your chances of making your own campaigns quicker. Because obviously, if you win the pitch with your work, then you'll get to make that work, and it's a lot easier to win, to create campaigns that way, than to take existing campaigns and redo them that the agency might have. And a great tip, someone once told me, I can't remember who told me this one, but you have to remember every pitch is signed off by the company's finance director. They're literally the guy in the room when the board look at the work and the marketing director's going, this is the route we want to go in, this is the agency. The money guy is the guy that signs it off. So know that person and understand what their agenda is and all this sort of stuff. And then you're more than likely to get final sign off. So, you know, again, for creative people, it's always a bit alien, but the more you understand how the money works in our industry, the more likely it is you'll succeed, because you're aware of, you know, the gatekeepers, basically. I'd ask with every pitch, is there a pitch theatre budget? This used to be a thing that was quite popular back in the day, but it's a bit of money that you can inject into the actual pitch process and do something in addition to just showing the work. And I really believe it's a great thing to do. And then, you know, there's sort of famous stories. I think it was the Saatchi guys with BA, where they sort of created a fake agency that was busier than it would have been because they weren't that big, and they hired actors and they all came in, and the client thought, wow, look, this is a super sort of productive, cool agency with loads of cool people. Did the pitch, and then they went away, and I believe that the client then asked for another meeting, so they had to get everyone back in again and pretend again, and then they won BA. And it's just a good thing to do. I think with this, it's more about using the theatre to enhance the idea rather than just maybe do what the Saatchi guys did. But whatever you can do on the day of a pitch to make it brilliant and memorable, the more sort of likely it is you'll convert. And when we were at TBWA, we won Muller, and the idea there was taking something normal and making it wonderful. So when the clients arrived at the agency, we got everyone in the agency to just be normal, and we hired a theatre director to stage direct the whole building and the whole pitch process. And then the clients went into the boardroom and saw the pitch work, and then when they left, everyone in the agency had got into fancy dress. And then when they left the building, as they sort of exited the boardroom and went down the list and out through reception, everyone who was where they were was dressed and acting in different ways and doing sort of wonderful things. And it was brilliant. And I think that single-handedly probably swung it. And it was just great fun for everyone to do it. So, you know, there's no reason why your office can't be as much fun as any sort of improv theatre. Sort of going back to what I said earlier, I think you want to achieve as well as be awarded, and by that I'm talking about winning new business or retaining clients for the agency or coming up with something in addition to awards that gets you noticed. And this is really important for job security, but also to sort of fast track your promotion within a company. Anyone who's slightly different will be made to sort of manage people quicker. And that will give you experience sooner as you know, of what it's like to run stuff. On sort of gratitude, you know, I mentioned this in the past, thank you letters. It's really good to sort of big up people that have been good that you've worked with and tell their bosses how good they are. And I'd encourage you to do this as often as you can. like we used to do it at the end of every project. We'd send thank you notes for different people that we'd work with, and it's really important, I think, to do. Kind of what Tiago spoke about, I think, again, when I reflect on sort of the highlights of the work I did, quite often there wasn't a sort of category at the awards for it at the time. We just sort of did stuff that lived in different ways and kind of felt right at the time, especially with the constantly changing media landscape and technology. You know, quite often the best work is so new that no one really understands how to award it or where it fits into the system. And again, I think you can create amazing traditional work, but equally you always try and do stuff that doesn't have a category, that is new and conceptually brilliant. Another one of the many skills I think great creators have is they're like the best lawyers. I've witnessed this, and I sort of learned to think like this. And once you sort of crack your campaigns, you then, I think Mark calls it black hat thinking at school, but you've just got to work out every way that is possible that someone can basically kill it, and then work out a way of defending it. And nearly always the great work survives because the creators mostly, or if you're lucky, the rest of the team doggedly defend it in a sort of polite and civil way, but they just don't let it go, and they'll just keep going and going and going and going, and make sure at every every stage of the process that it gets made. And it's really hard to do, but it's imperative you do it, because you will annoy people, potentially you will alienate certain people, because most staff and most clients just want an easy life and pay the mortgage and go home and see their kids, and that's totally cool and normal. But nearly always the great stuff, and the new stuff especially, is hard to make happen, and you have to keep going and defending it and have more energy basically than everyone else to ensure it does see the light of day. When hopefully you're in a department, or even virtually when you're in a virtual department, spend time asking everyone else what they're doing and getting to know everyone else. Don't just, obsess with your own work and try and get help for your work. So go and see everyone, ask what they're working on, learn from what they're doing, obviously, and try and help them as well. So, if someone's, doing an animated thing and a cool animator, or you just discovered, you could share stuff with them. But, I really believe that the whole sort of teams win mindset is really important. I remember right early on at Abermead, we were at the BTAA Awards, and Tom Carty sort of said to me, he was so pleased, and him and Walter kept winning everything, but the agency won Agency of the Year. And even when there was a bronze arrow for something one of the teams had done, he was really pleased, and he wanted the team to win. He said it's imperative we all win, not just us. And that mindset of, being in a team, and the great agencies have that. I think they all want each team to get a prize each year. It's not just about one team, So the more you can interact with everyone, putting your work up on the wall, going in and looking at their work, having that dialogue. Now more than ever with technology, I think it's really hard to do. So you have to sort of make it happen. The more fruitful you'll all be, the better you'll be as a department, and as individuals. And it's really rewarding. And this is all priming you to be great creative directors, this kind of behaviour. And again, Walter and Tom would say you got to outrow everyone. So, going back to sort of defending your work like a lawyer, or having the energy to outlive, everyone else. I don't want to make this sound like it's this sort of horrible world out there and it's already hard, but this is more about just believing in what you're doing and energizing everyone else and keeping going, and making sure that every stage is brilliant. And those guys especially had more energy and work ethic than anyone I'd ever worked with. And they'd always say, the client's trying to row in one direction, you've got to row in the other direction, and you've got to row quicker than they're rowing. And it's not a fight, it's just about pushing great creative work and making sure it's great and not compromising. And that is hard to do, but really important, because as soon as you start letting opinion and people chip in and change the vision and the product, the creative product, every comment will make it worse and weaker, and every sort of concession will make it worse. So as best you can, try and make something super simple to sell, super simple to make, and then allow everyone else to add to that project. And ideally, don't let anyone derail it at any stage. Again, I think I mentioned this before. It's a really obvious piece of advice, but worth really sticking to. Don't ever write anything that's not great, because you'll spend potentially 3 to 6 months of your life making something average when you could have been making something great. So if you only ever write great work, you'll only ever make great work. Your boss will know that you've been writing great work, you just haven't made anything, and they'll know you're great. So they'll keep giving you opportunities. As soon as you compromise, as soon as you sort of, sell out and do average, or you just want to be making something, or you're, compromising your creativity, that's when the rot will set in and you'll start becoming average. So always stick to greatness no matter what. And much as we encourage you to do it at school, I think the more you make, as in physically make the work you're doing that you want the client to buy, so the more stuff you can do in advance of the client seeing it, even the more likely it is that it will happen and the better it will be. So this is obviously highly dependent on what you're doing, but if it's feasible and you're able to create stuff prior to presenting, quite often that makes it a lot easier for the client to buy. But equally, you've already created something, so they're not going to have influence and compromise the process. So it's good to do if you can. Paul Unn once said to me, if you're struggling on a brief, make the first thing you see your idea, which sounds sort of odd, but again, it's a good sort of trick or discipline to do. So if you see a pigeon, maybe make a singing, the pigeons sing and have teeth or whatever, and that becomes something, and then you sort of processing that way. David Abbott would say, write with pictures, obviously a very famous writer, but he'd think in visuals as well as words. Very famously looking at the Economist logo, the red rectangle on the cover of the Economist, and seeing it and thinking it was a 48 sheet poster, and that basically led to the red out of white, or the white out of red posters. Dave Buchanan, another great creative from Abbott Mead days, who worked with Mike, he'd always go, you need time, money and talent to do great work, and very rarely do you get all three. You nearly always get two. And when you think about it, it's not totally true. That's like, you definitely need time to do craft, you need money to make great work, and you need the great people to do that. So on any project, ask for more time, ask for more money if you haven't got it, and absolutely do all you can to work with the very best people on that project. And great teams like Nick Wellington and John Gorse, I remember chatting to them, and they were like making the most amazing work. But Nick especially you just felt the guy was always suffering, and he'd go, yeah, we sold in this great campaign for Wrangler. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. He said, yeah, but I want to get Spike Jonze to shoot it, but he's doing a feature. So he was just in agony about landing arguably one of the best directors in the world to shoot it. And, he probably would have got Glazer to shoot it or someone like that at the time, but he really wanted Jonze, and they got Jonze. And it's that sort of obsessive, dogged, determination to work with the very best people. And he's absolutely right. It's such a big part of TV, especially, is making sure the people, your crew, if you like, are as good as the concept. And when I sort of reflected back on everything, this is, I think, the most important advice I ever got. And it's from Rob Oliver again, who's a brilliant art director at Abbott Mead. He's retired now, I believe. He's a photographer. But in any meeting, especially these days, if the client or whoever is influencing your work asks you a question, don't just react with the answer in the meeting, try and crack it in front of them. Just say we'll have a think and get back to you. And these this sort of sentence I've used a lot, especially when I was running stuff, because it buys you time, obviously, to get out of the meeting, to talk to the guys that did the work, or if you're the one that's doing the work, to have time to think about stuff and actually really make sure it's great before you go back and make the changes that they're asking. And you might go back and go, we've had to think about it and we can't think of anything better. We still think this is the best thing to do, which is, pretty standard for anyone who's trying to defend their work. But it's imperative, especially in a world of Zooms and instant work and digital stuff, that you buy yourself time to actually think and do the right thing. So that's the sort of key one for me. As you're doing now, you're growing your sort of BookCrit network. Make sure you keep showing the best people you meet your work and turn them into your mentors. I'd encourage you to look at growing a mentor base that isn't just in advertising, that isn't just from your BookCrit network. Obviously, if you want to end up being, someone like David Hyatt and having a fashion label, makes sense to try and find mentors in the fashion industry now. Maybe they become one of your clients when you've got an ad agency, and maybe you then end up doing something with them as a fashion label. So even when you just start, I really encourage you to aim super high. You could take them out for lunch, like I mentioned earlier, and turn them into mentors, hopefully over time, keep taking them out for more lunches. And it's really, really good to do, and just great fun, just spending time with brilliant people. I sent out a thing on LinkedIn asking for advice from people, and Dave Trott got back, and he just reiterated kind of what's imperative with advertising, which is impact. As Bill Bernbach's famous quote, if no one notices your advertising, everything else is academic. And Dave's obviously very strong and opinionated about advertising, and he's absolutely adamant there's a difference between advertising and marketing. I think this is on the money. However, I kind of still think now, and especially with the work you guys do, and just thinking about a lot of the work I've seen since being at the school, I think now, arguably, more than ever, creatives are coming up with marketing ideas as well as advertising campaigns. And if you can marry those two, if you get a brief from a client where you think, actually, there's nothing to say here, then I'm not really, it's a waste of money. If I do the client's job, if I come up with a marketing idea for them and they buy that, and then I do the advertising bit, which I'm getting paid to do, and do that well, then I'm doing the best thing on this project. And I kind of think now there's been a shift to innovation, implementation, and execution or communication. And the last bit, communication, is obviously advertising. Innovation is more research and development, and implementation is kind of more design, UX, that kind of stuff. So, but those three areas are sort of blurring. And, we spoke about this, and great people like Andy Sandos come in and talked about this. And I think the world we're moving into quite a lot now is that. So the old guard, like the traditional guys like Dave, and a lot of what I've done has been very traditional, still believe that you should just get a brief and do a great piece of advertising, and that's still as important as ever, and you might choose just to do that. But I think, there's a lot of fun to be said, thinking ideas as well, and marketing ideas as well as the advertising. And I can remember years ago, again, going back to Steve and Vic, they were at BBH, and they were working on a mobile phone called Rabbit at the time, and they were doing a campaign. And they came up with the idea of who would you rather have a one-to-one with, which at the time was a really brilliant, sort of famous campaign. And it's worth looking it up. The work's brilliant. And it was like Kate Moss having a one-to-one with Elvis in execution. And they went back to the client and went, look, can we call the product one-to-one? Because Rabbit's rubbish. Can we just rebrand it and rename it? And amazingly, the client agreed to do that. And they ended up sort of doing the marketing bit and the advertising bit. And this is going back probably 20 years, maybe longer. So I'm sure many creators have done this in the past. I believe Bogle invented the curly whirly, stuff like that. So I'd encourage you to be really innovative as well as impactful. Jono, I forget which year he was in. I think he was last year. It might have been 2 years ago. He's an amazing digital creative. I think he's at Wonderman. He sent me a whole bunch of stuff, but I'll just pick out a couple which I thought was interesting because he's kind of your age. And the best things he said, I think, were don't just hand over a project to the design or the developers. Learn what they do and get to know them. So this is really important, I think, like especially in digital. You know, I didn't meet coders till I was 42, and I didn't understand what they did at all. And it was amazing when you realise what a coder does and how creative they are. And obviously now more than ever, they're arguably the new rock and roll. And Jono was, you know, and still is one of the most sort of amazingly inquisitive, talented people, I think. And he's so keen to learn all the time and really into what he does, and amazing sort of just so much energy. So when he wrote all this down, and then he says humbly at the bottom, I've only done it for a couple of years, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. I think most of this is absolute gold. And also loved, like, learn unrelated skills. And I don't even know what he's talking about here. But doing loads of other courses that are random, that aren't related to what you're doing, will only help and introduce you to new ways of doing things. So I'd hook up with John if you can, get some advice off him. Touched on this before. Again, if you're working on existing campaigns that the agency has, just evolve them, do something different. So just quickly, obviously David Abbott did the very famous Economist campaign. I've told you this story before, but this is more for the sake of the guys that are new to the school. So me and Daryl couldn't get any headlines through the campaign, so we hung a poster over one of those whip mirrors in the underpass and wrote the line, "Know what's around the corner," and sort of built it and stuck it up, and then showed that to David, and he approved that, and it ran, and that became an ambient poster, which again at the time wasn't a media category. So it was just doing something new, which got us Economist ads out, and then we ended up luckily making a few as well. But it's just building on what they're currently doing. Don't just do what's always been done. Equally, like, everyone at Abbott Mead always wanted to do the next Good Things Come to Those Who Wait Guinness commercial. We all did, because, you know, it was just an amazing campaign to work on. But you're more likely to get known for turning around a really bad client and doing something brilliant with that than you are to do the next Guinness commercial. Because obviously Tom and Walter created that campaign, even though, you know, arguably Know It You Love was phenomenal execution, it's still not their original campaign. And I think the best teams create campaigns for the rest of the agency to work on. You know, you look at people like David Abbott, Paul Sullivan, people like that, constantly creating amazing campaigns. Charles Inge is another one. They're able just to sort of do it and then just give it away to everyone to play with. And that, I'll come on to it in a bit, but that is, I think, a sign of the very best people. Definitely ask for money to get trained and get your bosses to invest in future you. So Peter Souter once basically said, look, Rob McKee's in town, he's doing his movie workshop. He basically did a thing called Story, where he taught everyone in 2 days, I think it was, how to write Hollywood movies. And he paid for us all to go and do that course, which was just amazing. So we did that, and it just helped our writing. So, you know, again, the sort of intuitive and smart ones of you will realise that if you work out your career path and your goal and where you want to end up, and you get your bosses to train you in those skills, obviously that will help complement the work you're doing at the time for that agency, but equally it will help you learn on the job as you sort of evolve and be ready for the future. Another brilliant tip I came across and ended up implementing is annotating. And I used to call it, like, not join the dots, but join the annotation. So every time I'd get briefed, and in those days we'd have paper briefs that were printed out, as I was getting briefed, I'd just write in the gaps all the ideas that were coming in my head at that stage of the brief. And quite often you'd crack the brief within the briefing. Something that I was made aware of by Tim Riley. He's that chap there. Tim's still at Abbott Mead Vickers, I believe. Really amazing, creative. I thought we actually worked with him once as he was our creative director, and I thought he was an amazing creative director as well. But I don't think he particularly liked it. But I remember he worked at Simon's Palmer on Nike, which is this poster. And he was reading an article, I believe it was in the New Yorker, and the article was saying something like Michael Jordan defies gravity, I think was the sentence. And Tim's brain immediately went to, he's better than Newton, or, and that led to this execution. So his annotating off what he was reading led to the sort of concept. And I think that's a really good technique to imply, like I said earlier, in the briefing process, but also when you're gathering dots and looking for inspiration. If you can, just, I don't know how you guys think, but I always, when I'm absorbing something, I'll have a leap in my head that will take me somewhere else. And as soon as you can get that down on a piece of paper so you don't forget it, then you've got it. But the more you're sort of sparking, the more you're going to get annotations that create ideas and insights. And then Tim's, I think he's a hardcore Man U fan and obsessed with football. So even how he turn that idea into a headline, but made the headline like a football score or a sports score. It's just so brilliant. This poster on sort of every level, I think. I'm going to talk about Stephen Vick again. I've suddenly realised just how big an influence they had on me. But I mean, again, Peter Suter, who took over from David Abbott, like David, he just let anyone do whatever they wanted. So I'd come into work normally sort of 9 a.m, and Stephen Vick were nearly always leaving the agency to go to work. And they'd literally only ever be in the building for a briefing or a presentation, and you'd never see them. And they'd go and sit in cafes and sit on buses. And again, Steve would say they had to live in the real world to write about real stuff for real people, not a bubble in a big agency, glass tower or ivory tower. So that's what they did. They go and travel around listening to dialogue, like real conversation. What is the word on the street kind of thing, picking up insights and genuine sort of dialogue. And do, as I said earlier, they just ended up producing some most phenomenal work. And I think a lot of that was down to the trust that Peter put in his teams and let us all do whatever we wanted, because everyone works brilliantly in different ways. So, find out what works best for you and just stick to it. And if you get fired because some control freak boss doesn't like it, doesn't matter. You just got to make sure you're in the environment that lets you do the best work. Another good thing to do, if you can, is sort of implement a process. So every brief you'll get, they'll ask you to deliver on the brief and the mandatories and the budget and the media plan, etc. So that's the right thing to do. So if you think about every brief, you're going to do the right thing, the brave thing, and the maverick thing. And then maybe you orchestrate it in a way of, can we spend 70% of the budget doing the right thing, 20% on the brave thing, 10% on the maverick thing? Maybe you have a core idea and you bring that to life so that the client can go, yeah, that's what I've asked for, brilliant, I can run that, that's on brief and on budget. But then you also show them the brave thing, and that might be a totally different way of doing the idea, but actually a better way of doing it. And then you can also show the maverick thing. It might be something so radical that it's highly unlikely it's going to come in, but wouldn't it be great if we could do this? Now, nearly always the maverick thing is the right thing to do, ironically. So what you're doing is you're showing the client options. Nearly always they'll probably go with the right thing, but they might just buy the maverick thing and put all the money into that, and you don't know. And the thing with clients is they never know what they want until they see it. So if you can somehow build a process into how you show stuff or create stuff that enables you to do maverick work, then that will help. But you should always go back with what they've asked for sure. And then the key thing with any agency is clients. You can't do great work without great clients. So, I mean, again, back in the day, we'd all go on factory tours and see what clients did and spend time with them. Nowadays, it's very rare, but I'd really encourage you to meet clients as soon as you can, spend as much time with them as you can and understand what they're about and what they're trying to do and where they want to go with their careers. Like, treat them as a creative partner. And there's so many obvious reasons why this is a good thing to do. primarily you'll know what they're trying to do with their business and do the right thing with their advertising. But equally, if you know one of them wants to end up going to Red Bull and you can help them get there however you do it, and end up working with them as one of your founding clients, and obviously that's cool. And more clients you know, the better. Equally, do the planner's job. So we used to spend a lot of time with planners when we knew a client brief had come in, helping them write the briefs. And again, great planners are great creators, vice versa. You know, you guys know strategy, and you know, at that stage, if you're collaborating and treating the strategist like a partner, you'll end up with a great brief that the client signs off on that you're all happy with, and you end up converting and not questioning at the 12th hour and then having to rewrite and have no time to do it properly. Equally, write your own briefs, you know, create your own briefs. I've spoken about proactive work a lot throughout the year. It's imperative, you know, you create your own luck, and the best way to do that is to do all the work yourself, basically. On the notion of process, again, pitch ways of working to management that you think are better than what they're currently doing. So again, this just shows ambition and creating a way of working that lets you do more work how you want to work. I had the idea of AMVTU at Abermead years ago, which I pitched to Ian Pearman, and it was basically a Winnebago where we'd drive to the clients and literally sit in their car park and stay overnight, cracking out briefs for them. So we'd sort of go to them, and this was in the days before technology, which, you know, was quite a different thing and a cool thing to do, because most clients hated having to, you know, make loads of journeys and were too busy to see the agencies. So by bidding in and doing stuff in their car park, you kind of got rid of that. And then Pixar, very famously in their book, talked about giving post-it notes, different kind of post-it notes to the staff, and asking them to write on them what they do differently and then post it around the building. And that was really cool. I thought that's kind of like a, you know, what from an HR perspective can we change about how we're working, as much as the creative process or anything like that. And that was a really smart thing. So I'd really encourage you to sort of get into the shoes of the CEO and work out how can the agency work better, and sort of pitch that back to management. This sort of goes back to working with great people at every stage. When you're getting briefed, I'd share the brief with visual effects people, directors, coders, whoever it is. Broaden your team and get them involved in the creative process as early on as possible. Because obviously they'll suggest stuff. Oh, what if you use this effect, or we could do this with that, and for that money we could do this, or this camera's just being created, or this vision. You know, there's this special effect that's just happened that's really amazing. No one's doing it. By broadening your creative team and collaborating more with people, it just makes the work better. So try not to be like a very tight, controlling team that doesn't want to share any credit with anyone. Try and flip that and collaborate with as many sort of creative people as possible. Help the finance director sleep at night. Every agency's got one. Understand what the issues are with the money and try and help resolve that. And there's no better way than getting promoted and understanding how agencies work than by getting to know the finance director. It's really good. And again, quite a few creators told me this, like, as soon as you understand how advertising makes money, then a lot of everything else becomes a lot easier, because you understand the process and you understand what's going to stop your work getting made as well. So you know all sort of watch outs. But at the end of the day, we all need money to survive. That's why we go to work and why we do business. And understanding those people is a really good thing to do. I've spoken about this in the past, so I'll spend the marketing budget. Just make sure every year that there's no spare money left over in a client's budget that's not being spent, because then you can obviously get hold of that, going back to time, money, and talent. You're finding money, you're creating the time to do something, and then obviously working talent. So make sure you do that. Don't just read Campaign or Creative Review or Reddit or whatever it is you guys are reading these days. I'd read the client. stuff. So look at Marketing Magazine, any marketing, magazines or newspapers or whatever it is, wherever they read, understand their world. It'll tell you who's doing what, tells you who's moving where, what clients behind what. And obviously, if you want your own agency one day, you need to build up a sort of database of clients. So really get to know who's the great clients out there as much as the great creatives. And read stuff like the Financial Times, understand what's going on in the world of business, see which companies are growing that you could go for as potential clients that are on the up, kind of that sort of stuff. It's all kind of weird for creative people to think like sort of investment brokers or whatever, but the more you get into that space, the more opportunities will arise. And what you must do, hopefully you've been doing that all year, but don't ever lose any of your work, especially your scamps and your roughs. Arguably, as via Dave Dye's blog, we've all seen how he's sort of kept everything, and you see all his little scribbles and his initial ideas all the way through to sort of finished concepts. I'd really encourage you to keep everything and film and document everything. So obviously in sort of concept stage, but when you're making stuff and all the stages of the process, and then make sure you've got brilliant copies of every bit of work you've ever done, and then build, I guess, still an amazing website or something, do LinkedIn and that kind of thing, or do the dots, and just collate all your stuff so you've got it and people can see what you've done, and then show the world what you've done as best you can. Cool. So that's junior to senior. I hope that's helped. I'll now jump into creative director. So this is the transition, obviously, we will make if we choose to, when we're going into sort of more of a leadership role. Going back to David Abbott, best advice I think he gave was read the client brief twice. So every client will brief the agency with what they want. It's a really long-winded document that's full of marketing and business talk, which you need to understand. But by doing that and going over it again, you 100% know what the objective is, and you're crystal clear that you know what they need. And for a creative leader especially, to really understand the business objective, they can make sure that the planner hasn't dropped the ball or the account team haven't missed something as much as the creators have missed something. So really important, this one, to make sure you're doing the most professional job. And I think the key thing here with being a creative director is in the name. So direct, don't dictate. Don't be a creative dictator. I've witnessed dictators, and they breed horrible agencies full of paranoid, fearful people, and no one's happy. You want to direct creatives to do great work and help them get there, not tell them what to do. Like I said earlier, I think the best ones create campaigns that they let others work on. So they might do it for a year or two, or maybe straight away they'll ask everyone to jump in on it. But the sooner you're able to sort of give away what you're doing and let others thrive on it, the better, basically. I think that leads to the best people. Just going back to this one. So when you're transitioning from creative to creative director, you're nearly always working on briefs as well as directing briefs, and quite often you'll be writing on stuff that the other teams are writing on as well, working into you, and it's really difficult to sort of manage that process. So that's why it's great to just sort of share stuff with those people as soon as you can and not try and compete with them. Another really important thing, which requires a lot of work, but again, the best creative directors know every ad that's ever been done before, basically. And why that's good is obviously when they're reviewing work, they can say, sorry, we can't do that, it's been done before. Because what you don't want to happen, obviously, is everyone goes, that's brilliant, 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 brilliant. It gets made, goes out on air, gets entered into the awards, and all the juries and everyone goes, well, that's not original, it's been done before, and that's rubbish. And then you never win anything, and the client gets annoyed that you've created something that wasn't original. So you've really got to put in the hours, knowing the archives and the history, of advertising, obviously for the brands you're working on, but equally the broader context if you can. And every year, I shared links with you the other day for the One Show and D&AD and stuff like that. Every year you can see all the winners quite often for free for a week or month in the archives. So I'd really encourage you to do that. When you're in reviews, just make sure everyone speaks. It sounds obvious, but especially for the juniors or the introverts, it's very hard for them to get a word in quite often. So don't let your diary be, make sure your review times in the diary are long enough for people to have time to communicate and talk properly, but also listen. I think the great creative directors hardly say anything, take it all in and think, and then feedback with clear direction. Quite often in another meeting, not in that meeting. And they'll write notes as they're going through all the work, which is another really good thing to do, because it's very difficult to sort of keep up with everything and remember everything, especially the busier you get as a leader. But make sure you listen, write down everything, give everyone space to do their thing, and then time to think about, and then get back with clear direction. I think it's really important to try it before you sort of commit to being a creative director. And the best way to do that is sort of coming back to school, helping the students in whatever year they're at. So you come back into the SCA and you're creative directing basically, and you can just see if you like it or not with students. So not even people in your department. Conversely, if you're in a department, like I said earlier, and you're walking around asking others what they're working on and you're helping them with what they're doing, you're basically creative directing people in your department without kind of realizing it. But it's really important, I think, to try it before you sort of get promoted into it or have to commit to it. When you're within the agency, like I spoke about previously, it's great to sort of form an agency within an agency. So team up with a great planner and a great account person traditionally, keep working with those people, and then do a breakaway with them. Sometimes management happens and then they break away. So the guys that did Adam and Eve obviously were running Rainey Kelly and went off and did that. And the Uncommon guys did the same thing from Grey, I believe. So however you do it, it's really good obviously to make sure you're happy as a management team before you commit your mortgages and your lives to a startup. If you're in a partnership and you're trying creative direction and they hate it, I'd still try and keep working with them. So maybe one of you becomes creative director, the other one is your creative partner still, but he or she just is still a creative and carries on working that way. Because I think, again, the best leaders always have a sort of right-hand person they can spark with at the 12th hour, come up with a great campaign that because they worked previously, they can turn it around really quickly. And then the partner can carry on with the creative work while the leader goes back to leading. And it's really useful to have that sort of in place. If you both hate it, so you both try creative directing, you go, God, this is just horrendous. I just want to be a creative. I can't stand management or politics or issues. Then just make sure you're working into great people that love it. So they end up doing a startup or running the agency. You want to be their go-to team that they totally respect and like working with. So form those relationships. As I said earlier, I think the best thing to do is just to let everyone else run with whatever comes out of your mouth and not worry about it. I think this is hard quite often for people to do, especially if they haven't won enough prizes. There's a lot of insecurity with awards, and people tend to want to have their name on awards, because they haven't won them when they were a creative. So those sorts of creative directors can be a bit tricky. But I think as soon as you're creative directing, you just need to just give away anything. Just keep giving away all the time. Just give away all your ideas, give away all your thinking, give away anything, like all your cultural references, something cool you've just seen in a music video that no one's sort of done anything with. Whatever it is, just give it all away, and hopefully, the teams that work into you appreciate that and respect that and want to keep sort of working with you. Excuse me. So I think going back to not dictating, equally, it's really imperative you don't answer the brief. You let the teams that are working on the brief crack it, because obviously it's very demoralizing if you're a team and you're not making work and your creative director's just steamed in and had an idea and they're making it and you're not. Hopefully by the time you're creative directing, you're already established and people want you there and you're going to be part of the furniture, if you like. But it does get to the point where time's run out or no one's cracked it or the work isn't good enough, and at that stage then you do have to put in your own ideas, and that's when you can open your mouth and say, actually, I think this is what we need to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're just doing the right thing. But do all you can to make sure there's enough time and there's enough direction from you to ensure that the other teams crack it before you do. And as best you can, as soon as you're in with client meetings and with management or workflow meetings, just generate as many briefs as you can. So you don't have to write them, but just find the opportunities. You want to be as hungry as the new business director, basically, or the board account director. You want to be absolutely obsessed with getting opportunities for the people that are working into you to work on. Now, stepping up, so creative director to executive creative director or chief creative officer or whatever it's called these days, whoever's in charge. I think what I always did when I was ECDing was first 2 weeks or month even, I'd spend maybe an hour with each individual. So not as teams, just the individuals, getting to know them. So I'd understand what they're about, what they're into, what work they like doing, all that kind of stuff. So really understanding their sort of creative persona, if you like, and what they love doing. Because obviously when the work comes in, you're in charge of workflow and the client and the briefs. Casting is the most important thing. You want to make sure the right teams are working on the right bits of business. So the more you get to know your department, the better you can get at casting, and the more happy they'll be because they'll be working on stuff they want to work on, etc. I'd avoid going on shoots because it just takes up masses of time and there's no need for you to be on a shoot at all. So, I mean, similarly, as a creative director, I'd argue that's the case as well. As painful as it is not to go and fly around the world doing amazing shoots, you actually want to be in the building as accessible as possible for as long as possible, and that's the key thing. I think the best creative directors definitely and creative leaders always add something to whatever's happening. It's not about changing ideas or trying to sort of outdo the other people. It's just more about adding like incremental gains, if you like. So can you add thinking and craft at every level, every meeting, just every touch point, just try and make it 1% better or more, and that those people just brilliant leaders, I think. If you're running an agency, you'll have an awards budget as well as a hiring and a salary budget, and you want to defend that and spend it, because every year if you haven't spent it, they'll cut it. So you clearly want to have as much money to enter the awards as possible, because the creatives will want to enter stuff. So that's really good to sort of make sure you do that. Tony Cox, who ran BNP, DDB for ages and came to Abbott Mead, I think he was brilliant at this. He'd always hire teams before they won awards. So he'd work out of all the work that year, who'd done the best stuff himself before D&AD or Creative Circle or whoever would give out the prizes, and then he'd get them into his agency before they won anything. So not only did he get them slightly cheaper than they would have been, but he sort of got in before the others. So again, the most important thing as a leader is your department and the people, and you need the best people, and it's very hard to get great people. So it's good to sort of follow the talent and make sure you're recruiting as early on as you can. I think, as well as sort of making the work better, especially these days with it being very difficult to mentor staff and having time to sort of spend with each other, I'd always try and end each review with a sort of craft tip, or have you seen this film, or what about this book, or I'd leave a little tip with the guys I was working with, just because it just sort of came, I guess it came naturally to me, but I've spent years receiving great tips and wanted to sort of repurpose them. And it's, like I've sort of said to you in the past with the sort of money talk, especially, I think you need to make sure your department is as healthy, in other ways as well as just creatively, and you're looking after them. And it's really good to spend time understanding who they are and casting, that kind of stuff, and then following up on it, knowing what they're about, making sure you're helping them on that journey, and hopefully they'll appreciate that and they won't want to leave and work for someone else. So again, it's just basic management, I guess, and people skills, but it's really good to do and to make time for that. I think as soon as you're in leadership, or even before, like I said earlier, if you can create ways the agency works and pitch ways to management, like create a system where great work can happen if it on top of the usual system. So the best example, I think, is the Wyden wall. I think it might just be in London, but Tony and Kim would have a wall and just say, look, just put anything good up on the wall and we'll try and make it happen, basically. So it's very proactive, and it was a physical wall, which, going back to what I said earlier about putting work up, I think it's just so important to do that. So I really encourage you to sort of have a system that allows your department to do great work if they're not getting briefs through the system, so that they're given permission to do other stuff. So when they've got spare time, they know what they can do. I mean, at Google, the guys did the Friday thing, or the 20% thing, so that, a fifth of, I don't know if they still do it, but when I was there, a fifth of staff time could be spent working on anything, as long as it was related to Google business, which was amazing and led to all the sort of innovation. So, look at maybe how other companies have allowed creativity to flourish and implement your own way. So when Steve Branakis was running Creative Lab at Google, he'd always ask for like insight, idea, execution on a one-slider, because he saw so much work, and those guys would only have 15-minute meetings anyway, so there's no time for anything. So you'd write the insight in one line, you'd write the idea in another line, and the execution might be a few lines, but super simply and succinctly, he could then judge, what was good and what wasn't. But that was another great example of a system that I thought led to a lot of good work. I think I don't know if this is totally true for everyone, but I think the best creative leaders talk in ideas, and I guess are obsessed with it, but live and breathe their craft. And we've been lucky enough to hear a lot of great talkers this year, and I'm sure you've realised this, that the really good people, I think, it's just all in their heads and always coming out. And me and Paul Pateman, once we interviewed with Paul Silburn when he was running Saatchi's, and we had 2 interviews with him, and I can remember just everything he spoke about was an idea, like literally everything. He wasn't selling the agency or him, he was just telling us what he was doing or what his department was thinking about, or stuff he'd seen that he thought was brilliant. And it was just so inspiring, like literally half an hour of him talking, you just every sentence you learn something new, and you thought, oh my god, that's brilliant. Like he said, oh, Scream Egg, we're going to do cream eggs for Halloween, it's going to call it Scream Egg. And you're just thinking, oh my god, it's just brilliant, what a great idea. And he's, like I said, I think he's one of the very great, or sadly, he's passed now, unfortunately, but he was one of the very great creative leaders and creatives when he was working with Vince Squibb. I think, again, those guys just created campaign after campaign after campaign that ran and ran and ran. And those people are the ones you want to work under and work into and with if you can. You know, you want people who have that weird knack of just seeing the world differently and coming up with great ideas. And I think when you're a leader, it's really important that you make sure you're constantly inspiring people you work with great work and ideas, ideally on stuff you're doing, but equally showing them stuff that's happened in the world and making sure they're aware of great work. Again, as a leader, it's imperative that you look after the department, so defend the money that your department has so that you can pay everyone properly and enter awards. But equally, make sure they're not getting overworked, or you're really on it as far as HR. So have a good dialogue with your HR directors and make sure that everyone's communicating properly and they're being looked after. I think David Abbott, who was my first boss, would never get involved with anything. So he absolutely trusted his department. He'd say he could work on which briefs, but he wouldn't get involved unless there was a problem. I only ever saw him if there was a problem with what we were doing, which was incredibly rare and is more than ever now, I think. But if you can somehow build a department and trust your department and allow them to be autonomous and just do their thing, then they'll have to step up and do great work because they know it's all on them. Otherwise, there's no one else to blame. But also they'll appreciate that, I think, unless they need help, which they'll come to you for. The sooner you can trust and empower people, the better. So try and build a department that doesn't have strict process with obsessed reviews and you can't do anything unless the leader says so, kind of thing. I really encourage you to have a much more sort of level playing field and allow people, whatever age or stage they're at, to run with what they're doing. And just going back to the casting thing, so when I was at Toaster, Aidan, Rich and Tom brought in this thing, the show and tell thing, which is kind of what we all did at school, but they'd arrange for lunches, be about 2 hours. I guess there was maybe 30 of us in the company at the time. But everyone would bring something to talk about that they thought was interesting, and it wasn't work, it was just anything. And that was really cool. It's kind of like just inspiring. We just sit there and see all these cool things. And what I realized came out of that process that was really good was, like with the casting stuff I used to do, you understood what everyone was into and what was going on in the world. And then quite often different people within the company would realize that as well and start working with each other on projects that were similar interests. So people might be into brewing beer, and then another one's into design, and another one's into raising money for a charity or something. So they'd create a beer that they brewed themselves that gave money to charity, and that was also done off the back of show and tell exposure. So again, this is, I guess, another sort of process you could implement that encourages creative collaboration. I think, if you can, and I think you can do this still, no matter what, just have one team, one brief. So try and nail the brief and try and make sure any one team's working on it if you can. It's hard, but it's doable. And again, I think this comes down to strong leadership. But, if a creative team's working on a brief that's a good brief, everyone agrees is the one brief that we should all be working on, and they're the only team working on it, so if they crack it, they'll make it, then they'll just feel so empowered and trusted and respected and fulfilled. And that system can still be implemented. It's harder than ever, but there's no reason, especially if you have your own agency, that you can't work that way. I think crediting your staff, your teams, is absolutely imperative. I hate people that don't credit where credit's due. So obviously when awards are entered, etc., there's PR. Make sure that the article's all about the team, not you as the leader. Don't make sure the headshot is not your head, it's the team or the work or the client or whoever, the account guy, whoever it is. Just make sure all their names are in the PR especially in awards entries, make sure everyone gets credited for that, and do all you can to make that process happen. AMV has one of the most brilliant people in the industry called Linda Carlos, who has been there forever. I think she was in Traffic or initially, but she sort of runs the awards and still does, I believe, which is one of the hardest jobs going. But she was just phenomenal at making sure she knew who did what, everything was entered properly, everyone was credited, and it's so important to do. So I think as soon as you get into leadership, or you're running something, or you're the figurehead or whatever of a company, best thing to do is actually just to avoid the limelight. Like, PR the company through the work and the staff, but not you. I think that's the key thing, really. And when you get busy, and you're in a successful agency or whatever, and everything's sort of full on, people won't have time to see you, and quite often they're the people that need to see you, because maybe they're struggling, maybe they're shy, or whatever it might be. So make sure you seek out people that don't see you. There's nearly always a reason for the fact they're not seeing you. And again, you want the team to win. You want everyone to succeed. You want, people that might be struggling to turn it around and be fulfilled. So be conscious and aware of who hasn't been in your diary, if you like. And if you have a secretary or someone that looks after your schedule, just make sure you book in time to see those people. Just another quick note on pitches. Obviously, when you're running stuff, you can do it how you want. So I remember seeing Jan and Luke, who are a great team at Mother, and they ended up with an agency called Fabula, which is just the two of them. I think they had a barge in London. And we went to meet them once to talk about doing a startup, and they were pitching at the time with just top line ideas. So what they did was they'd have almost like a one slider in pitches of here's the idea, and the client would either go, yeah, that's brilliant, or don't like that. If they really liked it, then they could go deep on it. So they had all the sort of support work for the campaign, but they didn't bore the client with it all. If so, they just made sure, are you into this? And if they went, yeah, then they'd show them everything. And they go, no, not really feeling that one. They go on to the next one. Which sounds slightly like, geez, you're doing all this work and they might never see any of it. But it's just respectful of time, and they're just making sure they're only getting the client involved with the right sort of thinking. So again, you're working out what's the best process for your company or how you work, and making sure that's implemented. Again, so Tony Cox, going back to Tony at Abbott Mead, in those days, quite often it was one team, one brief, and we'd all agree on what the best route was. So Tony would go into the client meetings or pitches with the one route, but he was also kind of like a magician, so he'd have a couple other routes in his bag or up his sleeve, and if he'd read the clients, he's really good at intuition and people skills. And if he felt like they weren't into it, he'd go, well, and here's another one, and he'd just pull out another route, and they'd be like, oh, So what he was doing was trying to sell in the best work, and hopefully the clients would go, yeah, that's great, let's do that, without showing them any other options. But he had options should he need them, which again I thought was a really good sort of way of trying to do the right thing, but sort of covering bases if you need to. I think we're all in work for money, really, at the end of the day, and most staff want a review with their boss and they want money, and that really is pretty standard and fundamental. And when you're running stuff, and especially if you're in a holding company business, it's very difficult to get money quite often for various reasons. So you can pay your staff a bit more, or you might be able to bonus them a bit more, but you can always get other benefits or perks that you could then reward your staff with. So again, going back to casting and understanding your staff, or your show and tell sessions, or whatever it might be, I think good leaders work out how they can look after their staff and do the right thing, and then do it in ways that aren't just monetary. And I mean, Abbott Mead is a ridiculous example to talk about, because I think they're arguably one of the most successful companies. But we were there, I think I'd only been there a couple of years, and it was a 20th anniversary or 10th anniversary party. I can't remember, maybe it was 15. And I think it was Peter Mead that basically said to everyone, right, you're all going to get an extra week's holiday on top of what you're currently getting to say happy birthday, which is just awesome. And then they'd do the office Christmas party, and there'd be a raffle, and Adrian Vickers, one of the other founders, would draw names out of a raffle like a tombola. But it was all set up, so they'd spoken to all the departmental leaders to work out who needed what, and then Adrian would go, oh, what's the next prize? And it would be like £1,000 worth of clothes at Selfridges, and it would be the guy that dressed the worst in the office, and he'd pull it out, and it'd be that person's name, you know. And Indy on reception had a car stolen, and then they gave her a car, and it's just like, wow, it's brilliant, you know. So I think there's so many brilliant ways you can look after and lead, and, you know, have fun with, you know, and do stuff that makes a big difference to people's lives, not just on a sort of financial level. And especially within advertising, I think, you know, there's no reason why, you know, you can't do the right thing. I think Lucky Generals have got an apartment that I guess they bought as the company, and they let the placement teams live there for free in London, or maybe the juniors as well. You know, that kind of thing's awesome. So big part of being a leader is creating processes and understanding stuff, but also using your creativity to come up with ways of having fun and enjoyment and fulfillment and kind of things that go beyond the day job. And that's great to do, for sure. Another good thing to do is nearly always companies will have cash cow accounts, which are the big fee-paying clients that do the average work potentially, or the safe work potentially. Ideally, you want to work somewhere that doesn't need these sorts of clients, but they do exist quite often. And if you're running, or if you're in, let's say your agency's not massive and you've still got to be doing work as well as running stuff, I'd encourage you to just take hold of that kind of client and just do the job on it, because you're freeing up the department to do the cool stuff, and you're making sure the money's, you know, the money's getting made, and you, hopefully by that stage, your ego or your need to do award-winning, you know, standout work has sort of gone away, and you're happy to sort of carry the department a bit. I mean, again, going back to AMV, I can remember a story where David, when they started out, I think they had this big retail account that paid maybe half the agency's wages, but it was killing the department. And David realised this and got Peter to fire the client, which is a big deal, as you can imagine, like losing half your billings. But then it freed up the agency to pitch for other stuff, and it was a huge deal. And it meant that, you know, clearly Abbott Mead stood for sort of doing the right thing and not just, you know, working on stuff for the sake of it. I worked with Alistair McGregor Hastie. I think he's now still ECD at BETC Paris. But I remember him telling me he ran an agency in Italy, and he got a van and he drove the juniors to Cannes in it. So then they couldn't afford to send all the juniors to Cannes for the awards festival. So he said, oh, fuck that, I'll just hire a van, and chucked a load of mattresses in the back of it, and they all drove up, had a road trip, spent the night in the back of the van, had a riot. And, you know, that's another great example, I think, of just doing the right thing, just having fun with everyone. Again, at AMV, we had it was actually a snooker table, a full-size snooker table, not a pool table. And there was this moment when one of the account people had put some scamps on the table, and David came in and went, what the hell are you doing? What's going on? And they all thought, oh shit, he hates the work, or, you know, something wrong with the work. And he was just annoyed that someone put work on the table and people weren't playing snooker, which was brilliant. So it's just kind of like, you know, making time for fun and making sure there's fun and it's not just work is imperative. And I know it's a bit of a cliche these days with sort of bean bags and ping pong tables and whatnot, but doing initiatives again, or creating an environment where staff can thrive is awesome. And best example I can think of was Google's office in London. The guys had an amazing library. So for a digital company, they had the best books in the world that you could go and read, and it was quiet in the library. And they also had sleep pods, so you could go and have a sleep if you wanted to, which was great as well. And I think that's just brilliant. It's like, if you're tired and you want to have a sleep, go to sleep. So that was good. And there's no reason why anyone can't do that kind of thing. This all goes back to the autonomy thing. I guess that's maybe a bit repeating what I said before, but really, hire the right people, trust them, give them the autonomy to run with their own thinking. Don't micromanage them. Don't, dictate or control the process too much, but only get involved if you need to. And then finally, founder. I'm not an expert on this. I had to go at starting an agency, but I know people that have done it. And when me and Paul Pateman were trying to do our company, we were lucky enough to see a lot of good people and get advice. So some of this has come from those chats. When I was at Abbey Vickers, me and Paul were asked to do the AAR reel, which is, I'm not sure they're still doing it, but every agency would create like a film that sold their agency to clients, and clients would go and see the AAR and go, who do you think I should get to pitch my account? And the AAR would sort of go, oh, you should look at these agencies, and they'd show the AAR reel. And me and Paul at the time didn't even know what an AAR reel was, so we sort of blagged our way into the AAR and said, can we look at all the best reels and the worst reels so that we know what we're doing? And luckily enough, we had a meeting. They managed to get us in and show us stuff. And what was absolutely crystal clear at the time, Fallon London was the best agency in London by a country mile, and Richard Flintham and Andy McLeod were the creative leaders. And I'm not going to remember the rest of the management team. I think they're the guys that went off and all set up 101. But we saw their AR reel, and theirs was so brilliantly simple and great. And it was literally shot in a taxi, black cab, and the cab would pick up all the founders of the agency one by one. They'd all get in the cab and then drop them off at the office. And as they got into the cab, you just hear their conversation, their banter and their chat. And it was just crystal clear that they all were friends, their chemistry was natural, and they all got on really well. So as a client, you're looking at that going, God, they all care about each other. This is all genuine. It's not all fluff. And, I want to give these guys my business, basically. Why wouldn't I want this team to work on what I'm doing? So going back to sort of being an agency within an agency, chemistry, I think, is absolutely critical for the founding partners or any management. And it's so obvious when people don't get on. And if you can start with the right chemistry, you'll hopefully be as good as those guys were when it comes to chemistry meetings, which is, the initial meeting you have with clients in the pitch process. And it's those key meetings, I think, where it's crystal clear who gets on. And, like I've said a lot, the founders of AMV, the chemistry was just off the scale and so genuine, and that sort of lived throughout the whole agency. Everyone was very similar. And I think much similar to sort of Toaster in a way, and the Google guys, I think when you build a company where everyone sort of gets it and is in it for the right reasons, that chemistry sort of, continues. And even people that left AMV and went on to do other companies and whatnot, they're all similar, and there's that shared sort of respect for each other. So it's really obviously important to be creative and superstars creatively, but make sure you form teams of people where you're all sort of kicking in and enjoying each other's company. Peter Mead kindly met with us, and his key advice to us was be a box clients want to tick. And by that, he basically meant again, this sort of goes back to finance directors, but when you get appointed by a client, the finance director has to sign off, why are we paying this company money to do what we need? And that client has to justify that to the finance director. And if it doesn't become a box they want to tick, they don't understand what you're about, the finance director won't sign it off. So make sure you call yourself an advertising agency that does advertising for brands, if that's your thing. And if that's the box, then that makes sense. But equally, as the world changes, there's more and more boxes that happen. So, you know, there's new boxes happening all the time as well. But just make sure you're clear, you know, what your offering is. And on that note, we met with Sir John Hegarty at the time, and his advice was, well, one of the bits of advice was decide what you stand for and stick to it. So work out the box you want to tick, you know, work out your positioning, if you like, you know, what is the thing when someone searches for you in Google that comes up and summarizes what you're about, and make that your thing and stick to it, because it takes a while to succeed as an agency or a company, and it's not going to happen overnight. So you need to have the confidence as founders of what your mission is and your vision, so that people can buy into it and then stick to it. I think ideally you want to build something that you don't want to sell, so your exit strategy isn't cash in after 10 years and retire. You know, I think the guys that set up Mother, Robert Saville, I think it is, I think obviously the Wieden+Kennedy example I mentioned earlier, I think, you know, the best agencies are the ones that don't cash in their chips or sell out. And as soon as you sell out, it's very hard to maintain that that integrity and that culture. So onboarding, I think, again, if you're a founder, I'd really spend a lot of time working out, how are you going to meet clients? What is that initial meeting? How do you get them into your business? Like, you want to make sure your initial clients, definitely the first 10, are not going to kill you, like not going to break you. You want to make sure they're right for you. They're going to work in ways that complement you, that you and they thrive in the right way. So the AM partnership, I can't remember what they called it, but I remember witnessing their onboarding at one point, and they just had a really clear, like, questionnaire way of clients going, are you this kind of client? If you are, then we should meet, rather than just meet anyone. And, you know, they knew the kind of work they wanted to do, and they knew what they stood for and how they worked, and the clients sort of bought into that process and respected that. On the flip side, for staff, Wieden+Kennedy London, I only freelanced there for, I think it was a month. But even me going in on freelance, I had a whole pack. I got a book of the area, of how the agency operated, a whole way of like just process stuff and badges and passwords. So literally within 10 minutes walking through the door, I could start working effectively and felt like I was part of the family and all that kind of stuff. So it's really good, again, when you're running stuff or founding stuff, to get a budget and invest in things that aren't just, you know, doing the ads. So I'm nearly finished now. Thanks for bearing with me thus far. Another good thing when you're working out the box you want to tick and your positioning and what you stand for is, quite often, a client, you know, you'll form relationships with great clients, but you'll be within a contract within your current agency, so you can't go and do a startup and nick the client straight away, because obviously that's breach of contract, and you don't want to do that. So what you can do is position yourself as a communications agency, for example, rather than advertising agency, and by that you're not in conflict. So it's quite good sometimes to call yourself something slightly different to an advertising agency, and then straight away clients that really like you and want to work with you can give you small bits of their portfolio or whatever to work on straight away without any sort of issues. And I think if you're going to start a company, you want to start as you mean to go on, and I'd really encourage you to invest in a piece of work or do a piece of work right at the beginning that is outstanding, that puts you on the map through the work you're doing rather than just your reputation. So when you PR and launch, you're going, hey, we've done this, rather than look at us, we're all really, successful people, and this is what we used to do before we started doing, so I'd really encourage you to do that. And just quickly, a few examples. So Mother, when they started out, did Mother Miniatures, which in those days, there was sort of two things going on. Football hooligans were a big thing. So English football fans would get into a lot of trouble, being violent and abusive, and get, disgracing the game. And Tamiya was a model, like a toy model brand that made figurines and stuff like that. And Mother obviously wanted to be, quite a anti-establishment, cool agency that was different. So they created all these Mother Miniature sort of make your own football hooligan kits, and the craft in this and the copy were just brilliant. And again, they just sent that out to clients, I think, as a sort of new business caller, but straight from the off, you totally know what this agency's about, and they're going to do brave, interesting, maverick work that isn't safe and predictable and vanilla. Sorry about the quality of this slide. I couldn't actually find the initial press ad, but when Droga 5 launched, I think in the States, the first thing they did was Dave Droga thought, why don't people pay for tap water in restaurants? When you go to fancy restaurants, they're paying, I don't know, $10 for Evian or whatever it is. So he came up with the idea with his team, I think, and called it the Tap Project, and basically worked with UNICEF as their founding client and said, let's charge everyone in the world who orders tap water in restaurants to pay for it, and that money should fund water supplies to the third world or developing countries, which is what they did. And I think they just did one simple press ad to launch the project and a whole bunch of stickers and things for restaurants. So a old school press ad, and that kind of got them on the map. And then these guys, they're not Moonbot, they're not an ad agency, but again, if you want to end up creating Pixar films or animation or whatever it might be, so what they did was they kind of wanted to be the next Pixar as an animation studio, and I think they're based in Illinois, and they got amazing tax breaks to start a creative company in this state, but no one knew about them, and they wanted to go on the map. So they created this amazing animated film called The Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lesmore. The film's brilliant, and the film went on to win an Oscar for Best Animated Short Film. So the very first piece of work they did won an Oscar. But I mean, that's obviously quite amazing. But equally, they did ebooks and interactive books. They did a whole bunch of other stuff, which at the time no one else was doing. So they transcended, the media they were expected to do, push into all the sort of different channels, the creativity and technology, and ended up, doing stuff that no one else was doing, and that led to them doing a whole bunch of cool commercial work for Chipotle. Through the client on that one was Communication Arts, I think, in America, and that went on to win the Cannes Grand Prix for commercial, and that was in their first year, I think, and then they kept doing more and more stuff like that. So, if you're able and brave and talented and lucky enough to do your own company, you have to start, I think, as you mean to go on, and especially if you've got your own money to do launch work, and it's just such a great opportunity to do something really cool. And the last slide is from Charlotte. So Charlotte was at Abbott Mead years ago with Bonnie, her twin sister, and she's now, as you can see, doing all sorts of different jobs. And I think she said just some really just compelling wisdom in her comment. So do everything with integrity. If something seems stinky or morally wrong, then refuse to go near it. Never present anything you wouldn't be willing to give up precious time with your kids for, when you have to go and make it, don't let people fill your diary and head so much that it squeezes out all the creativity, joy left in the day, or if you haven't got kids, the equivalent life force. So she's an amazing creative, but she's taken time out to have children or a child. I'm not sure she's got more than one child, but the point here again is don't let the industry suck you dry. Make sure you have time to do great things, but whatever you're doing professionally through work, make sure it's brilliant, because you don't want to be, being taken away from your loved ones doing work you don't believe in and stuff like that. So, going back to the slide about always, make sure you only ever write great work, and then you only ever make great work. I think this reiterates that. Marrying with making sure you have time with your family and take holiday and stuff like that. And the point she says about don't work on stuff you don't want to work on is great as well. I think, the most respected and decent agencies don't work on cigarettes and gambling. Probably, hopefully they don't. I mean, A&B didn't even work on toys because they didn't want kids to be badgering their parents who couldn't afford the toys to get them toys. So that was another thing that those guys did. So especially if you're starting a company, have an opinion on what clients you want and the moral sort of values of that, and stick to that as well, even if it costs you money and stuff like that. Cool. So that's it. That's my email. If anyone who doesn't know me wants to sort of get in touch after this. But yeah, hopefully that's been good. Just stop sharing. I don't know, is Marcia still on this or not? I don't know if I can speak to anyone or whether I should. I don't know if there's time for questions. Where are we now? It's 12 o'clock. I've gone on quite a lot. Okay, maybe we can finish up, because I didn't realise I'd overrun so long. Cool. Okay, lots of thanks. All right, I think hopefully that's a lot to take in. As always, get back to me with any questions at some point in the future. Anyone who's not at the school and wants to know more about stuff, then obviously reach out. But yeah, good luck with it all. And I'll see you in school in a bit. Cheers.